Good evening, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for joining us on this nightcap edition of Sipping Tea with Stacey T. I'm your host, Stacey T. Hope everybody's doing well. See you guys coming in. This is a new time. Want to make sure, good evening. Want to still make sure to still do this because I was really excited about the opportunity to do this. I had an engagement. We actually had a women's conference earlier, and it was amazing. And but I still want to do my sipping tea because I said every week I'm doing one. So episode 8, can you believe it? We're on episode 8 already. So I'm excited about that. Today's topic is promises. We're gonna get into it. I think that if we're honest, a lot of us make promises to other people. We make promises to ourselves, and we don't always keep them. So let's unpack that a little bit. But before I do, as always, for those of you who are new, I have a tea that I'm going to be trying every day. Some of them I've had before, some of them I have not. Today's tea is Ceylon pure black tea. So that's what I'm having. Twinings. I may have had it before. The name sounds familiar, but it's not like dawning on me what it tastes like. So we're gonna try it out, see if I like it or not, and I'm gonna give an honest assessment. For those of you who haven't seen it, I will tell you kind of what I think it tastes like, if I like it or not, because some of them have a little bit of a different flavor. I can't drink any of the herbal teas, so unfortunately, when you kind of buy a pack like this, they do come with some that are herbal teas. So yeah, if you're wanting herbal teas, let me know. You can have them because I cannot unfortunately use them. So hello, I see Janet in the room. I see Tiffany and Cheryl and Kathy have just joined. Welcome. Hopefully you're having a good. Today's Saturday, right? Hopefully you're having a good Saturday. It feels like a weird day. So I am going to let the tea steep a little bit. And I will tell you, it got pretty instantly dark. So that's interesting to see, what the flavor is of that. Hey, my J-Law's here. I'm so glad to see you here. So promises. And for each of the subjects or topics that I have chosen, they've had a personal element to why I've chosen them. And I feel like I'm in a kind of a time in my life that I'm looking over a lot. I'm being, more more introspective than I typically am, and that's saying a lot. So if you've known me for a while, you probably have seen my level of introspection, how I'm, I think about a lot about how I, am going through life and what I want out of my life, that type of a thing. So that's kind of where I'm at. And so I've kind of been looking at the things that I have said to myself over the years, right? So as I'm like getting closer to 50, I'm thinking about, the things that I've mentioned that I've wanted out of my life, things I said, oh, I'm absolutely going to do those things, and where I'm at with those, what happened. I think often we make these kind of pledges or oaths or vows to ourselves, and we intend to stick with them. I think the intention is always there to, I don't want to say do right by ourselves because that sounds a little weird, but I think we always have the intention of fulfilling the promises that we make to ourselves. Perfect example. How many of you have ever made a New Year's resolution, right? You may not have made one this year, but how many of you, if you're in the chat, what was the last New Year's resolution that you made? If you feel comfortable sharing it. We're all family here. But if you feel comfortable sharing, what your last New Year's resolution was, or if you're still making them, what your one was for 2025. And then we're going to talk a little bit about that, unpack it a little bit. So I think my tea is dark enough for me to try it. You've never made one before? That's so interesting. Was there a reason why you never made it before? This is super hot, so there's no way I can already tell you this. I can drink that because I want my taste buds. So I'm not going to drink that till it cools down a little bit. Why have you never made a resolution? Not that that is a bad thing. I'm just curious as to the reason why you never, you're saying, okay, it's a new year, I'm gonna do. And I think sometimes when people say promises, they make it out to like be a big deal. While a promise is a big deal, what I mean by that is it doesn't have to be something like, I promise to do this year. It's kind of a goal that you set for yourself that you might have, wanted to fulfill. You're very systematic. Oh, okay. All right. I'm finding out a little bit more about you as these layers get peeled back. So, I mean, I've made lots of pledges to myself. I think one of the last resolutions that I made was, to be intentional about like the people that I allowed around me. And I feel like for the most part, I was really good with that. What was interesting is because I feel like a lot of it happened around the time that I was an elected official. And so I had made this pledge to myself, I'm going to be really intentional about who I allow in my space. And then I was running for office. And running for office, you have a whole bunch of people that are in your space, many of which are, you're talking about being systematic, but many of which are really intent on just either gaining your vote, swinging your opinion one way or the other, or trying to get something from you. I didn't intend to have to spend time with people like that, but I recognized being in that system, being then political, that I had no choice, because even if I was not going to socialize with them personally, there was going to be, the need to have conversation, whether it be to get a motion passed, whether it was to talk through one of the items. So that was an interesting kind of a time in my life. And I remember feeling kind of like, I made this pledge to myself, I made this promise to myself, and I literally had no control over whether or not it was going to be able to be fulfilled. So that was super frustrating for me. I know, in years past, I've definitely I'm going to lose weight this year, I'm going to work out all the time, I'm going to eat better or more intentional about what I eat, or I'm going to try to eat 3 times a day, which I don't, right? Typically. So that was another pledge that I've made to myself that I clearly did not, as I just said, that I don't, right? So I didn't fulfill that. And I think oftentimes when we make all these pledges to ourselves and time happens and maybe we don't fulfill them, or we, kind of get stuck in a rut and we kind of can't get out of that, we feel a lot of disappointment in ourselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to drink this tea to see, it feels a tiny bit cooler. So let's see. I haven't seen some of you guys write what your promises that you made to each other, or to yourselves for New Year's resolutions. Let's see what those are. So how do I even, honestly, it tastes like black tea. So if you've had black tea before, it tastes like that, but there's nothing, I don't know, there's nothing that really stands out about it. I wish I could really describe what it tastes like, but it doesn't really have a standout flavor. Like there's no extra punch. There's nothing. I'm curious what it said. Maybe I should have read what it said. It says, classically blended for a crisp and refreshing tea. I don't know. And again, for those of you who just came in, this was the tea that I just tried out. I mean, it's not horrible. I feel like, again, it would be like a tea. Like when I drank, for example, like one of the chai teas, and there's a bunch of different ones. When I drink those, they have a spice or like a specific flavor to them. So that's what kind of attracts me to a lot of those types of teas. It just tastes like, if there could be a diet black tea, that's kind of what it tastes like to me. So you had made a pledge to yourself to have more fun, go out, and self-care. Woo-wee! How have you been doing on any of those? And again, it's intention, right? Oftentimes we make promises to ourselves, or at least I'll say this about myself. I make promises to myself often because I recognize an area that I'm lacking in. And so I see self-care as one of the ones that was mentioned for someone else. And that's been an issue for me. I actually used to feel very guilty about self-care because I felt like, I'm using money that somebody else could use or need at some point. And, what if this other person can't go and this person can't do this for themselves? So I felt really weird about doing that. I'm recognizing more that that's actually detrimental. And even today, we were in, as I said, we were in a women's conference, and somebody brought up the scenario of, if you've been on a plane before, they tell you if they're in an event of an emergency, you put your mask on first and then assist the other person. I think often, all too often, we end up helping the other person first and not really thinking about ourselves. But then what happens, right? Because we end up feeling depleted, and what's the why? Is that really their fault? Because some people, they're just going to take. That's just what they are. That's who they are. That's what they know. But it's really our fault that allow it. It's our fault that allow people to just drain us dry until we don't have anything else in the tank. You made a promise I was going to try to walk every day. It's not every day, but it's often. You do an amazing job. You do an amazing job. Every time I see you somewhere taking a hike or a walk somewhere, I'm like, man, I should probably at least go outside. So, I think that you're doing an amazing job. And the thing I like about what you just wrote is that when we make a promise to ourselves, we also, I feel, we need to lead with grace. Because there are things that happen, and we intend, to go out every day for a walk. On a day like today, maybe you don't want to go out for a walk. It's pouring out. Maybe you like to walk in the rain, right? But I think that we need to give ourselves grace, because we often don't. And what happens is, we don't fulfill a part of the promise, or, we're like, on day 1, I'm going to do this. And then it's day 4 and it hasn't happened. And we're just like, forget it. I'm not going to do it. It's not going to happen. And so we entirely give up on those promises to ourselves. But what happens is then you get to be a person like me. And I just told you I'm reflective. Now I'm thinking back on all those promises that I made to myself, and kind of wondering what happened to them in part, but also saying, man, I was really hard on myself. If I noticed on day 4 that I said I was going to, work out every day, and maybe I worked out only one day, I felt like a failure, right? I felt like a failure. I felt like everybody else was going to view me as a failure. And so what happened is I just was like, forget it. I would get so down on myself for not kind of sticking to it and not having the discipline to be able to do it. And discipline is challenging. It is really, really challenging. So, sometimes, again, we make those promises, but we do have to give ourselves grace. So let's kind of go back in time, as you notice that I do in my episodes. And we're going to talk about Stacey as a young kid, and really think about, what are the promises that I made to myself as a young kid. So I want you guys to journey back to your younger selves as well, and think about those things. Because promises actually start happening really young. And it's not even necessarily just the promises that we make to ourselves, but it is the promises that we make with other people. I promise that I'm going to be your best friend forever. How many of you can think back to, maybe elementary school or middle school? I'm not sure if all elementary schools had one, but middle schools typically do. And then high schools, I know, do have yearbooks. And, in my yearbooks, it would say, we're going to be best friends forever, right? Don't ever change. First of all, please change, right? Whether it's even it could be something as simple as your hairstyle, but please change, right? Change for the better, but change. Don't be afraid of changing for good. But in that, in our mentality, we're going to be best friends. We're going to conquer the world, blah, blah, blah. I can't tell you that there are so few people from that time, especially if I go all the way back to elementary school, very few people that I speak to. Now, I do know that there's some people that have been able to maintain those relationships all the way through and, deep into adulthood. And I think that's amazing and admirable. But sometimes, based on life circumstances, that's not your lane. That's not your journey. Some people are, seasonal. So they may have come in your life, been a positive impact for the season that they were there, and then they float on by, right? But I do have there are a few people that I've been able to keep in contact with. I'm telling you, the internet has been a saving grace for that, because other than that, I probably wouldn't have any people that I even knew what was going on in their lives from way back when. But what I will say is, thinking back to, that younger person, and thinking about some of the promises that I made, and not even so much the promises I made to myself initially, but really the promises I made to other people. What was interesting when I looked at that was, I didn't, again, and I was talking about this as an adult, I didn't have control over whether or not those promises ever realized or kind of existed in fruition, right? They came to fruition. Why? Because I can't control somebody else. So I remember, one of my first best friends, I would say my first best friend, I never intended for, I didn't even look at life having been lived without this person, right? And so then to, have a series of situations take place that were harmful and hurtful, that separated us. I look back on that and think about, that was kind of one of the first promises that I made to someone that was fractured, right? And I think oftentimes when you think about promises that are made to you, right, it feels different than promises that you kind of entered into. So obviously, as kids, our parents promise us lots of things, and I think sometimes it's just to make us shut up or be quiet or not, cause ruckus or whatever it is. Like, if you do, and a lot of it's, what they call now bribing, or that type of thing. Like, look, if you're quiet, I will get you a piece of candy, or you can have a piece of chocolate, or whatever it is. But if you look back on those things, how many of those things did parents actually do? Right? They said, if you do this, then I do that. So they were kind of entering a contract, right? If X, then Y. But the why never happened. And then when you asked why, they were like, look, you just need to be quiet. That type of a thing. And I think that when that kind of happens, and again, this is me really thinking about it now with the kind of the sense and the thought process I have now. But looking back on that, I feel like that's the first time that I recognized, and I don't think this was necessarily intentional, but I think that was the first time that I recognized that people didn't always stick true to what they said they were going to do or be. And that's a really important lesson to learn. Actually, it's a really important lesson to learn, because that's life. Right? And I don't think that our parents were trying to teach us, be really thoughtful and teach us life, at that, by not holding true to a promise. But it's one of those things that is a teaching lesson, because people do say a lot of stuff. I've had bosses say, oh, I'm going to get you a raise and we'll never think about letting you go. Well, I'm not employed right now, right? So it happens. I've had people say, oh, Stacey, you are the sun and the moon to me, and then break my heart, right? So the reality of it is, I think sometimes people make promises because they don't realize the depth of what the impact is when they don't fulfill those promises. They don't realize the pain that can happen when you don't fulfill a promise. Hey, Christina, I see you come in. Welcome. My daughter holds me accountable to go to Walmart. I'm sure she does. But the reality of it is, if you've told her you're going to do that thing, then yeah, they're going to hold you accountable. Kids are amazing with that, right? If you tell a kid that you're doing anything, they will hold onto it with a vice grip. I'll never forget this. And it didn't happen to me, but I think it's a funny story. My nephew would come here all the time during the summers, and the funniest thing, right? So he would come in the summers and stay with us, and my sister and I, we were gonna go out and we were gonna have girl time and hang out, and so we went out, and my nephew was like, "Oh, can I go?" And we're like, "No, you can't go. It's just for us to go out." And my sister said to him, "Hey, if you're still up when I get back, I'll play a video game with you." Let me tell you, that kid did not go to sleep. I don't remember what time we came in. It might have been like 1 a.m. And as soon as we opened the door, he popped his head up. He said, "Ani, you're home. We can play now." And I was like, "Good night." I did not promise that kid anything. So you can have fun and fulfill that obligation. And she did. So she didn't make a promise that she didn't keep. But again, kids do remember. So be very, very mindful, because I want you to think back on promises that might have been told to you as a kid that didn't happen, right? Oh, we're going to go to this place, or we're going to, go on this vacation, or I'm going to get you these pair of shoes or sneakers that you really want, or, there's lots of things that our parents say. And again, sometimes it's not intentional. I think that sometimes people overcommit and overpromise, and then look back on things and recognize that they're like, not going to be able to do that. As adults, now we have to think about that, because as an adult, if you're making promises that you can't keep, what is the impact? Because you've lived it already. You've lived being a young person. You've lived being a child that was promised things or told things were going to happen, and it didn't happen for you. Yes, I had to hold on to the promise. It's a teaching moment. It is. It's a teaching moment for you and for him, right? It's a teaching moment when you make a commitment to someone and you actually hold true to that commitment. There's such a beautiful trust that is formed there. There's such a you've now created a safe space with that person, right? So there was some people that I worked with, and as I was going through things, especially when like a lot of racial tensions were coming up, there were a few people that I could go to, because I was working basically with all white people. And me, I'm like going through this stuff and I'm trying to navigate it, and it's weighing on me. Like, I remember having a big portion of my job was like to welcome people, right? And so I'd be like, welcome, blah, blah, blah. And I'm supposed to be on and like zippy and all that stuff. And I was like, I just, saw another black man killed by the police, and my brain is not like able to like just flip a switch. And it was so important for me to have people that, showed up for me in those instances. So when you're able to do something like you just said, and you made a promise and you stuck with your promise, it creates a safe space, just like my coworkers did for me. They created that safe space that I could navigate, and I could, cry if I needed to before I did my job, or I could just like literally step away and they would cover for me if at all that was possible. So important. So we're young kids, we're making promises to ourselves. Oh, we're going to be friends forever, blah, 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 right? That doesn't necessarily happen. Now we're starting to get older. What is your ability to trust, and how does that impact your ability to trust what people say to you? Because you've heard people say, man, words mean nothing. But words are supposed to be, your word is your bond. Is that true anymore? And that's a question I'm going to pose to you all. Do you think that, what people say, they should be held accountable for it or to it? Because I honestly feel right now we're in a space and time, well, kind of feels like a little bit of a twilight zone, if I'm going to be honest. But I feel like we're in a space and time where people just say any crazy thing that comes out of their mouth. And they have zero intention of holding themselves accountable to it. They have zero desire to actually do what they're saying. But they feel like, in the moment, it sounds attractive, it sounds good. And if it can get them what they want out of that interaction, then they're going to do that. But yeah, I'm really curious. Do you think to this day, the phrase, my word is my bond, is that a true sentiment? Because I don't know. So I'm really curious to hear. So you guys can just simply write yes or no in the chat to that one. And I'm going to take another sip and see maybe if, as it's sat, if it got a little bit tastier, maybe. We'll see. All right, so on the second taste, I would say it's a little bit, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's better per se. I mean, it wasn't bad to begin with. It just kind of doesn't have anything like notable about it, right? I'm sure what I would say is if you like black tea, but you kind of find it a little like bitter, you'd probably like this one. It feels a little bit lighter to me than your typical black tea. So that's just a note on the, again, Ceylon from Twinings black tea. Pure black tea. So nobody knows if their word is their bond, or you guys are just tired today because it's later. You're like, Stacey, you have us here at 8:30 at night, and you want to know if my word is my bond. Well, I'm here, so my word is my bond, right? And let me just say that about, thinking about it. I I try to be very intentional about making promises to people, because even even at my age now, when people make promises to me and don't fulfill them, I have it's challenging for me. I'm not going to lie to you. It's challenging for me to navigate around, cuz if I'm going to be entirely honest, it feels like they're lying to me, or it feels like they lied to me, right? Unless they come to me and say, Stacey, this was my intention. And even then, sometimes it still hurts. I'm not going to, because what happens is when people say something to you, let's say like they plan a date for you guys to go hang out. And I'm talking friends, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, husband, wife. You make a plan, you set a plan to go out, and then they just don't feel like it that day. They call you, but they call you like right before you're supposed to hang out, like that type of stuff. Now, obviously, if somebody's hospitalized, you get grace, right? I get it. But when people just decide because they just don't feel like it, and I've been looking forward to it all week, that's what I want people to understand. When you make a promise, it sends something into the atmosphere, right? I've made a promise, I've made a pledge to you. So when I've done that, I expect that to mean something, right? So when it doesn't feel like it means something to you because you're not taking it seriously. You're like, oh, we can just hang out whenever. But I've been looking forward to it. It might have been the one thing all week that allowed for me to kind of get through my week, because maybe I had a cruddy week and I really needed somebody to, hang out with, or be able to just, let all that stuff kind of wash off my back. And now you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do it, or I just don't feel like it, or yeah, can we just do it another time? Or even worse, you don't say anything and you just disappear. That drives me crazy. I think that as we're older, you need to, be able to stick to what you're going to say you're going to do, or at least have a conversation. Be an adult, have a conversation. Yes, you think your word is your bond. I try to make my word my bond, but sometimes it's not possible. 100%. 100%. Sometimes it is not possible. But what is possible is communication. That is always possible, even if it's after the fact. Again, I'll never forget this. I remember I had surgery, and I can't remember what it was for, to be honest with you. And I remember waking up from the anesthesia and be like, I need to call my job. I need to call my job. I need to tell them I'm not coming in. And they were like, your job already knows. Clearly under the effects of the anesthesia. But even then, me holding true and covering and being responsible for my words or my commitment was important to me, even with all of that going on, right? Why that was the first thing that came to my head, I do not know. But yeah, when you promise, you are holding yourself accountable and setting expectations for the other person. 100%. You are. This is the thing I say. Why make the promise? Like, we have to, as adults, we have to take accountability for some of the things we do, because again, we all have, I guarantee, and I don't, know this 100%, but I would go out on a limb and say every single person that's here right now, and those who will watch it later, have been disappointed by something or someone, right? You thought somebody was something, or you thought the person was different than they were. You thought the person would stand up for you and they didn't. You thought the person would show up for you and they didn't. You thought the person was just not something that you found out them to be later, right? That happens. Sometimes it's our fault. Sometimes they've already given you every indication of who they are, and we're like, no, but I see good in them. And they're like, no, I'm just who I am, right? So sometimes it's our fault. But the reality of it is, that happens. We've all been disappointed by someone being or coming across or presenting as very different than they are. I remember in dating, I used to always say, and this is the hard thing, like in dating and even in getting to know someone in friendship, right? You want to tell people like the things that you like, you want to tell people the things that you don't like, but you also, for me, didn't want to start telling them everything. Because I figure this, and I learned this earlier on, that men would send representatives of themselves. And what I mean by that is they would, as soon as I told them the things that I like, they would morph into right? Shapeshift into that person. And then the reality of it is you can't hold that position for that long. So who you really are is going to come, hey, it's going to jump out of the box. And I'm like, oh, that's who it is. Man, I got had, right? So instead of just being who you are and letting me make the decision about whether or not I want to even allow that in my circle, you kind of get that representative. And unfortunately, we meet that person. And sometimes if we look back on our past and our own history, sometimes we were that person. And there's a variety of reasons why we may have done that. A lot of the time, and often if we look back, it's because we have kind of created this layer of protection over ourselves because someone or something made promises in the past that they did not keep. So unfortunately now, moving forward, you kind of look at everything, every situation that even kind of replicates that or feels any way similar, you put it in that, wait a minute, we're entering into this zone again. I remember being here before. Now, in fairness, this person or this opportunity could be entirely different than the one you had before. But because it feels similar, now you're in a space where you're kind of like, I don't know how this is going to go. I feel like this is going to go bad, and it's going to go bad really quickly. So what you do is you try to protect yourself. Unfortunately, what happens is this. And I'm going to tell you, what I'm about to say is not easy, and it's something that I continue to work on. When we kind of recognize that we're in a space that we feel uncomfortable, sometimes then we only give parts of ourselves, portions of ourselves to the conversation, to the opportunity, to getting to know the person, right? Because we're in protection mode. So you're like, they don't need to know all that about me. And I'm not saying every person needs to know all of your business. Please do not do that. Right? Not every person needs to hold all the things that are important to you. However, you have to gauge, are you getting to know this new person? Are you comparing this opportunity to something in the past which does not allow you to experience it for what it fully could be? And I think for me, going back to myself, so because I don't know what you're doing in your situations or how you're experiencing things, but I know for myself, that is 100% the truth. If I feel like something is resembling something in the past, immediately it's like, my antenna goes up, right? Some people will call it a spidey sense. Some people will call it discernment. But immediately I'm like, something feels off, or it makes me feel uncomfortable. Now, there's also an inner part of ourselves, and you might say, oh, well, Stacey, maybe you're experiencing red flags. That could be the case, but you have to be able to decipher. You have to be able to find out, am I immediately, I feel something that feels any way similar, so I'm just putting it over there because that's safer for me, or am I seeing a legitimate red flag, right? If you're, dating someone and they're never available anytime before 10 o'clock, well, you kind of know what box you've been put in, right? If they never want to see you out in the daylight, you've never met any of their family, and you've been dating for a while, well, you kind of know what's up, right? That's not a hidden thing at that point. So you have to be thinking, am I legitimately giving this person a chance, this opportunity a chance, or am I noting that there's an issue and I have to kind of rectify that issue? All right, I'm going to have one more sip of tea just because I feel a little tickle in my throat. All right. So let's go back to high school. So I went a little bit through, I would say, elementary school, middle school. Now we're in high school. High school is this interesting time because in high school, you're trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my life? Which is such an odd thing, right? So for those of us who decided to go into college or to a training program or thought about that, you were going to be making a series of promises, right? You're going to be making a promise maybe as far as a loan or a grant. You're going to be making a promise to, care for yourself and stay on campus and deal with all those types of things. Or you were making promises to, take up a trade, go to work every day, go to work every day, all those types of things. So there was a lot that was happening. It is the craziest thing. When you think about it, when I take a step back and I think about the fact that 17 years old, 18 years old, I'm making decisions for the rest of my life. And I mean, not for nothing. At 17 and 18 years old, who has any sense? Like, you have such a limited scope of the world, such a limited sense of yourself, and you're about to sign, let me sign away, I'm going to sign a check for, or I'm going to sign a promissory note to pay back all this debt. I'm going to sign, I'm going to go to this college and live by all their rules. You're just signing, making promises left and right with zero idea of how the true world works. Like, zero idea, because you've been so sheltered. For most people, been exposed to such a little scope of the world. And now I'm making all these promises to myself to, I'm going to be this certain thing. I'm going to go and study this specific thing. I'm going to come out with an internship and a job, and I'm going to do this. Or I'm going to go to work. I'm going to be an intern, or I'm going to be an apprentice, and I'm going to learn this trade, and I'm going to join this union. I mean, it's all these promises that we're making as kids. So it's really interesting how our world and how our life is designed on making all these promises when we have zero wisdom. Like, zero. And maybe it was just me, maybe I was, and I would think I was fairly smart, right? I would think I was a fairly smart person, but to have a full vantage point of the world, no. I had such a limited idea, and I was signing up to make all these promises. I look back on that time and think to myself, man, what was your reasoning for making all these promises? Like, what was your thought process? I don't know that I had a thought process. If I'm going to be entirely honest, I went to Boston College, and I went there because I was like, I had just always seen BC, like, paraphernalia, jackets, and hats, and I was like, I want to go there. And then I remember seeing, like, a football game, and I was like, yeah, that's exactly the environment that I want. I had no idea what I was getting into. Zero. Zilch, nada, right? And then I had opportunities to go other places that were less expensive, but no, did Stacey at 18 or 17 have the processing or, the state of mind to make a better promise to myself? No, I didn't at all. So I made a promise that it is what it is. I graduated and met fantastic people that I still count as friends. However, the reality is I could have made a different promise to myself and had zero debt. Zero, right? So I think that, we have to think about what is our reasoning when we're stepping into these conversations, when we're making promises, or thinking about these new opportunities. What is it that is driving the promise that we're making? So now let's think about it. I graduated, and then what? that was literally the question. And then what? Now what do I do? Because when I graduated, it was a weird period of time, and I graduated and didn't really have the next step. I had some, personal stuff going on, but I didn't have the next, employment step already mapped out for me. So then I was like, okay, I need to find a job because my student loans are going to kick in soon and all that stuff. And that promise, it comes, right? I'm telling you right now, they, above everything else, they will get they will find you to get their student loans paid for. That promise that you signed really quickly because you wanted to go to college, they're looking for you, right? And so I was like, okay, I have to figure out something. So I literally just took something. And I signed on and promised again to be a good employee, and I'm just signing away, right? Again, no thought about it. And so sometimes, and mind you, that job ended up being beneficial, and so sometimes we sign onto things that can be beneficial, but we're still walking in blind and not making a decision. We're letting a decision be made for us. So we're making a promise without any understanding of what it means for us and what it could mean in the future. I was fortunate where I believe God was just like, this girl's all over the place. Let me help her out a little bit, because she's just, she doesn't have any true direction, and I really did not. So I'm making all these decisions, making all these promises to myself, but I have no direction. And I think truly looking back on that period of time, that was a period of time that I recognized that I was making a promise or making bunches of promises, but not believing in myself. I was making promises without any type of direction. I was making promises without anybody to even help me navigate like the world of work. My mom had worked in the same industry, in the same field, and quite frankly in the same classroom for the majority of the time that, I've been alive. And so for her, like, it's not that she never had another job, but she already, like, her job situations were always like already, mapped out. For me, I'm like trying to navigate this whole world of work and like, what do I do? What do I like to do? I didn't even know that it was going to be this difficult. I really had not thought past college. I had not thought out my life at all. I just was kind of like, we'll figure it out as, as things go on. But it doesn't matter because student loans don't care about you trying to figure out your life. You made a promise to pay back those loans, they're coming for you, as I mentioned before. So I still have to navigate, how to go through and fulfill that particular promise. But in the meanwhile, I'm still trying to, date and, because it's so funny. In school, I remember a lot of the young ladies, getting degrees and whatnot, but everybody was just trying to get married. Like, that was the big thing when I was in school. Like, you go to college to meet your husband. Well, let me tell you, that did not happen for Stacey. That's why I say I will try, hope, or plan to. That is so good that you're so particular with your words. I think that's really great that you're like, I will try, I hope to, or I will plan to. Because it does give you a little bit of wiggle room because, there have been times that I have made a promise and I broke the promise because I felt like being in the perfect example. I made a promise to go to an event with someone and then they told me where it was. And immediately when they told me where it was, I was like, like, I do not want to go there. I do not feel safe there. I do not feel like that's the place for me. No, thank you. No, ma'am. No ham. Not doing it. And so I called them and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to go. I mean, instantly. It wasn't even like I played them or wasn't honest. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to go to that. Maybe you should give my ticket to someone else. Yada, yada, yada. Because there are times that you do intend to do something or, you hope to be able to fulfill a promise and it just does not happen. So that's different. But again, one of the things that I hope you took away from that conversation is that I communicated. Oftentimes people get so hurt by broken promises because people do not communicate. Why do you think people do not communicate when they're about to break a promise? Because people know. Let's be honest. I think for the most part, when we make a promise and then we break a promise, we already knew we were going to break the promise, right? It's not like we had a choice. We had a choice whether or not we were going to fulfill the promise or break the promise. So why do you think that people get so hurt or so upset when we break a promise? Or I should say, I think that's kind of common sense why people would be upset. But I think more so, why do you think that people do break them? Why do you think people do break the promises? Instead of just saying, hey, I can't be there and communicating, why do people not communicate what they're about to do? And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, I don't want to hear their mouth. Right? Or I just don't want to go. The reality of it is I thought I was going to go and I just don't want to go. And again, that's your prerogative. You're entitled not to go. Social anxiety is so real. That is so real. It's like I feel, obliged, like I have to be there. And some people just don't want to, have that conversation. But that's also the reason why people don't go, is because they have social anxiety. And some people are not, man, there are so many things that I can tell you about that. But I will tell you one instance is I let people in my space, and by that I mean my physical space, like the actual proximity to me, if I want them to be there. But there are some people that are space invaders. Like they're just all up in your face. And I'm like, oh no. Like I need my bubble. Like if I invite you into my bubble, cool, but then I'm gonna back out of the bubble. Like I don't like people all up on top of me, right? And some people just don't get that. And so I totally get it. People, because they're non-confrontational, 100%. That is such a true thing. I can't tell you how many conversations don't happen because people do not like conflict. They are so afraid of having a rough or tough conversation that they'll bob and weave and do everything to avoid that conversation. But guess what? We're adults. We have to have difficult conversations at some point in our lives. And if you've made it to the age and stage you are right now and have never had a difficult conversation, you need to be in the ring because you've mastered the art of float like a butterfly. Like literally, you have bobbed and weaved your whole life, and I have no idea how you do it. The other thing is that's actually not a great way to navigate the world because it's exhausting. It is exhausting to do any and everything to avoid having difficult conversations. People fear the other person will be disappointed 100%. I think that, but guess what? Life has disappointments. And I shouldn't say nobody. Most people do not, make a promise or plan a date or plan an outing or, express an opportunity to someone with the intention of hurting them or kind of jerking back the opportunity. I don't think people typically think in that way, though there are some people that are, like that. But what I will say is that, there's a real thing that, if you have to have a conversation and say, yeah, I don't want to go, it may hurt their feelings, but it's better to hurt their feelings and be upfront about the why than just ghost somebody, or if they paid for your ticket and you just don't show up and then that's it, like that's not cool, right? So I think that even if we have conversations where we know somebody might be hurt, their feelings might be hurt, and or they may be disappointed or they might get confrontational, we need as adults to have those conversations, because what that does is I feel like it gives a measure of respect back to that person. I feel like even if it's confrontational, I'm going to tell you that even if it's a situation, now if it's dangerous, that's different. If somebody's just not rational, then please don't say Stacey told you to have a conversation with somebody that's not rational, right? Because that doesn't make sense. Don't do that. Don't put yourself in danger. However, if the person is rational, even if they're upset, have a conversation with them. Tell them that you value them. Maybe make a different opportunity available. Make a different type of date or environment, because quite frankly, sometimes people assume that all people that they're around can do all things, and that's not necessarily the truth. There were some people at my last job that, going to a speakeasy would be cool and they would love that. And then some people would be like, oh, I don't want to be in here. It's dark and it's loud and people are weird and, it's not my vibe. So not everybody's going to fit into every single niche that we have. But what does fit is respecting the people that you want to have in your circle, even if it's on the outer periphery, right? Even if it's people that are colleagues or people that we might go to church with, or we might, go and hang out with randomly here and there. You still want to be able to say, I, as an adult, had a conversation because I promised that I was going to do something, and I want people not to live their lives with all these broken promises. Because what broken promises to me, I think of, in my mind for some reason, and I don't know why, but an eggshell comes to mind. Maybe it's because we're talking about eggs so daggone much recently. But, eggshells are all jagged, right? So imagine everything is just like all these eggshells, all these broken promises, or all these broken eggshells that just keep getting, people are trying to put them together. And you can, if you kind of super glue them, but there's still little cracks and there's still things that just don't fit right. I personally, Stacey does not want to contribute to people having brokenness, because there's enough of that out there. And I think that if we are more mindful about our part in how people heal, or how people have conversations, or how people feel seen, I think that if we're more thoughtful about that, then that's helpful, right? I feel like that is the direction that we need to be headed in. And I get that for some people that is difficult, and maybe even me even talking about this is making you feel some type of way because you're feeling, challenged and that type of thing. And for some of you, this is going to be stretching you. But part of life is being stretched, and it is growing, and it is doing things that are uncomfortable, whether it's changing the way you think, the way you act, how you interact with other people. I think all those things are important. I think also people don't say anything because they know the conversation will expose them for not really wanting to fulfill the promise. That is so true. That is absolutely true. People, look, if you can make a promise and it sounds real good, right? And you get a few people that believe it and some suckers that just like believe anything, right? Then it makes you look like you're the man, so to speak, right? I'm the boss. I'm handling business. I'm making promises. So, I mean, yeah, everybody would like to be Oprah. You get a car. You get a car. Okay, we don't have Oprah money. So the reality of it is, when people say things like that, they, again, may have big dreams, big intentions, the best of intentions. But now they realize when the rubber hits the road, can't do that. I don't have the ability. I don't have the finances. I used to have people, and I hear it all the time. Oh, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And it's not to say that I don't believe you can do all those things. I think that is wonderful. I think if you have vision for your life, that is fantastic. How are we getting there? What is your plan? And I believe, yes, God is, the person that you need to have a conversation with. But even he says faith without works is dead. So what is your plan? Like, what are you doing to get there? And I can support the journey. I've had lots of friends, come up with businesses, and I'm like, oh, that's great. And, lots of people that came up with those businesses have not done them yet. And it was similar to me, right? I kept talking about sipping tea. I'm sure people were sick of hearing about sipping tea with Stacey T, because I talked about it for years before I even sat down and said, nope, I'm going to actually do this. I'm going to start the platform. I'm going to hire somebody to make my logo. I'm going to do all those. And I did those things. 2 years ago, I had the person do the logo, literally. And then what? I did not fulfill my own promise to myself about doing something. So sometimes it's even you checking yourself, like, Stacey, you said you were going to do this. Like, what is the problem? Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's, again, for me, it was fear, not feeling that I was ready enough, not knowing if people would care what I had to say. But at the end of it, I knew that I was supposed to do this. And so that's why I'm doing it. But you have to also recognize, for some people, the journey is different. Some people might, do things right away. Some people, the journey might be another 2 years beyond what took me to even start this. I'm missing stuff. Sometimes people make promises to hook people in. Man, I could have a whole nother conversation on that. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Narcissists do that very regularly because it's attractive, right? Look, if you can sell something and somebody's going to buy it, yeah, especially if it makes you feel good. The reality of it is none of us want to be that person. I'm hoping nobody that's listening to this wants to be that person that is making promises for themselves, right? Because that's not what this is about. This, and I don't know, it's weird because I don't really call it a podcast because it's, an Instagram Live. But what I will say is this platform is about healing and self-reflection and encouragement. Like, that's what this is about. So if you are, a narcissistic person, I do not have the ability to help you heal. I can pray for you, but that's a whole nother platform. That's a whole nother thing. I don't have that capability. But what I will say is that's a very true thing, unfortunately, is that some people only make promises because it works for them. It suits them. In the moment, they're not even thinking about the impact. And that's what I want you to walk away with. When I make a promise, whether it's to myself or to someone else, what is the impact? Am I going to be able to keep it? And if not, am I willing to have the conversation, whether it be tough, uncomfortable, or whatsoever, whatever it is? Am I willing to be grown up enough to have a real conversation because it needs to be had? People, I think, when you make promises, your intention is to fulfill them. If your promises are not meant to be fulfilled and you're making promises for self gain or whatever, then unfortunately what you put out does come back to you. So just be aware of that. And I feel like, even if you're making a promise to yourself, especially one because you know what you're supposed to do, what your purpose is, and you're making all these promises to yourself and you're not fulfilling them, what you're putting out, what? No seed. And so you can't even get anything back out of it. Right? So you're like literally sowing or like going to the ground and putting no seed in there. You might like let rain come on it. You might put fertilizer, but there's no seed. So nothing can grow from that. You get nothing in return from that. So I just want you to be very mindful. Hopefully, just in thinking about the promises that you've made to yourself, maybe you start writing those down. What promises have you made to yourself? What promises are you still wanting to hold yourself accountable to? And maybe what are some of the promises that you're like, that was a silly promise. I made that promise not really thinking through what that meant. Then I also want you to go to promises you've made to others and apologize to them if it's something that you can apologize for. Because people have hearts, right? They have souls, they have minds, they have dreams, they have goals. And if you are holding up their progression by any means, they deserve a conversation. They deserve an understanding. And they, more than anything, they deserve respect. So I would ask that you think about those promises you made to yourself, write them down, the promises that you want to, still move forward on, get to them. Every day that we get is a gift, and every day that we don't, that we don't push ourselves to fulfill the promises that we know are ours, to like, we have them right here, but we keep just closing our hand, release them, and then start to till the ground, start to like really work the ground, and you're going to see, I'm telling you, you're going to see these things start to grow and blossom, but you have to do the work. You have to do the work. We have to keep it real with ourselves. If we have the capacity to fulfill a promise before we start making promises to others, man, you're preaching right now. 100%. That is 100% the truth. We have to look at ourselves. I think people say a lot of stuff because, that's what people do, right? They talk a big game. They do a lot of stuff. They say a lot of things, but the capacity is so important. If you don't have the bandwidth to do it, then you don't have the bandwidth to do it. It doesn't mean you'll never do it, but while you're making promises, be intentional about what you're saying, who you're saying it to, whether it's yourself or someone else, and are you going to be able to actualize what you're promising? So with that, I want to thank you for being on me with episode 8. I cannot even believe it's already episode 8. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being on this journey of Sipping Tea with Stacey T. Please, 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 if you have not, please follow me on YouTube, which is the same handle, Sipping Tea with Stacey T. Tell your friends, share the link so that I'm trying to grow my audience. So as much as you can do to help me with that, I would be so appreciative. And finally, I will say, like I say at the end of all of my episodes, please be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and extend to yourself and to me a measure of grace. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope to see you next Saturday on Sipping Tea with Stacey T. Bye, everyone.